In April 2010, Fabian Cancellara did something almost no rider in history had done. In a single spring, he won the E3, then the Tour of Flanders, then Paris-Roubaix, the two most brutal one-day races on the planet, back-to-back. At the Tour of Flanders, on the steepest ramp of the Muur van Geraardsbergen, he attacked. His only real rival, Tom Boonen, was right on his wheel. And then Cancellara simply rode away. Not in a sprint, not out of the saddle, grinding. He pulled away while seated, almost calm, as if Boonen were standing still. By the top of the climb, he had 400 meters. It was one of the greatest displays of raw power the sport had ever seen. And within weeks, a lot of people stopped believing it was power at all. Because in May, a video appeared online. In it, a former professional cyclist named Davide Cassani stood next to an ordinary-looking road bike on a stand. He pressed a button, and the pedals began to turn on their own. A motor, he explained, small enough to hide inside the seat tube of a frame, switched on by a button near the handlebars. Then the video cut to footage of Cancellara at Flanders and Roubaix. It froze on the moments just before his accelerations and pointed to a small, odd movement of his right hand. A flick. The kind of motion you might make if you were reaching for a hidden switch. That was it. No motor was ever found. No bike was ever seized. It was a demonstration, a piece of footage, and a question. But the question landed like a bomb. Because the rumor was already in the air. There was a real device on the market at the time, the Gruber Assist, a little motor that could feed around 100 watts of extra power into the pedals. 100 watts is the difference between hanging on and riding away. And suddenly the most dominant rider in the world had a very simple explanation hanging over his greatest victories. Cancellara was furious. "It's so stupid I'm speechless," he said. "I've never had batteries on my bike." He called it outrageous and pointed to the obvious. The risk would be insane for him, for his team, for the bike maker. A champion of his stature would never gamble his entire career on a hidden wire. The UCI agreed it was unlikely and admitted something worse at the same time. They had no way to check. There was no scanner in 2010, no test, no protocol. If a rider had been hiding a motor, the sport's own governing body conceded there was simply no way to prove it. If you believe the truth about a win matters more than the trophy on the wall, hit subscribe. This channel reopens the cases the sport closed too quickly, and we name the riders nobody else will. Stay with me, because the people who actually built those bikes have something to say. So is it true? Look hard at the case against him, and it does seem damning. The accelerations are strange. He drops a 3-time Paris-Roubaix winner like a child after 200 kilometers of racing without ever looking like he is suffering. Years later, the retired pro Phil Gaiman wrote in his memoir that watching the footage, Cancellara probably did have a motor. The accusation has never gone away. But look at the case for him, and it falls apart fast. The motor in that famous demonstration was wider than the seat tube on Cancellara's actual race bike. It would not have fit without a visible bulge. It weighed enough to nearly double the weight of his frame. In a sport where officials weigh bikes to the gram, the early motors were loud enough that other riders in a small breakaway would have heard it. The man who built Cancellara's bikes at those races, his personal mechanic, said it was flatly impossible. He assembled every frame himself. He insisted a hidden motor could not have gotten past him. There's also a far more boring explanation for the Muur attack. Cancellara was a freak time trial engine. His entire career was built on enormous, sustained, seated power. Riding away from a rival while seated was simply what he did. It helped that the accusation landed at the worst possible moment for the sport's credibility. In the years just before, fans had watched winner after winner get caught, test positive, or confess. By 2010, a furious denial from a champion was not worth much because everyone had already seen champions deny things that turned out to be true. So when a strange video suggested the impossible, plenty of people were ready to believe it, not because the proof was strong, but because their trust was already gone. That is the quiet tragedy buried inside the Cancellara story. He was being judged less on what he actually did, and more on what the men before him had already done to the good name of the sport. Here's what makes this case impossible to close. It is too late. The bikes are long gone. There is no frame left to scan, no battery left to find. Nothing short of a confession from Cancellara himself or from the one mechanic who touched those bikes could ever turn suspicion into proof. And neither of them is talking. So the sport is left with the worst possible outcome. Not innocence, not guilt. Just a permanent question mark hanging over one of its most beautiful victories. And the suspicion refuses to die. In 2017, when Gaiman's book reignited the whole thing, the new president of the UCI announced he would investigate the Cancellara case, even knowing any physical evidence was gone. Reporters cornered Tom Boonen, the man who got dropped, and asked him point blank, "Did Cancellara use a motor to beat you in 2010? For the first time, Boonen did not say no. He smiled. He said he did not know what was true and what was not. Years later, when asked to share a stage with Cancellara at an event, Boonen reportedly joked he would only do it on one condition, that Cancellara bring his 2010 Tour of Flanders bike with him. That is the strange power of this story. One video, one flick of a hand, and a generation of fans was given permission to doubt everything. This is the world Lance Armstrong left behind. Once your greatest hero turns out to be a fraud, you stop giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. People watched Cancellara ride away from Boonen and thought the same thing they thought about every dominant performance after Armstrong. No man pedals like that. They must have help. Of course they would. Maybe Cancellara is exactly what he says he is, one of the strongest riders who ever lived, robbed of the right to enjoy his own legend by a viral video and a rumor. Or maybe he got away with the most audacious cheat in the history of the sport, in plain sight, on live television, in front of millions. The evidence will never be enough to tell us which. And that, in the end, is the real scandal. Not that a champion may have cheated, that cycling built a sport where, even when the whole world is watching, the truth is something you can never quite prove. So where do you land? Greatest of his generation, or the one that got away? If you want the next case the sport wishes everyone would forget, subscribe. We follow every one of these stories straight to the name behind it.